Hi folks, WoodenBoat Dan here. Just wanted to give you a heads up. The podcast you're about to listen to was recorded several years ago, so some of the phone numbers, email addresses, website links, and time-sensitive information are no longer valid. Please keep that in mind as you listen. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is woodenboatdan@gmail.com. Thank you and enjoy the podcast. Welcome to Hooked on Wooden Boats podcast episode number 128. I am your host, Dan Matson from Stanwood, Washington, and this is the world's first podcast fully dedicated to celebrating the art, craft, history, tradition, and romance of wooden vessels around the globe. Welcome to the podcast today, and it's great to have you on board. I hope you enjoy the show. We always plan on having fun here, and it usually works out pretty well. Today's featured segment is an interview with David Nichols. David lives in Texas, and he's got quite a varied background as a wooden boat builder and author of several books about building boats and about sails. He's also a big wooden boat user, and he's part of the Small Craft Skills Academy along with Howard Rice and John Welsford. I had a real good chat with David here recently. I'm going to play that recording here in a couple minutes, so stick around. I think you're going to like it. I am still working on unpacking my garage from our move about a month ago now, so I have not been working on my partially assembled scamp, but I hope to be starting that soon. So I haven't been out on the water. It's just like spring's kind of around the corner here. We're getting a few nice days where it's actually in the 60s or a little higher. And I think it's supposed to be in the 70s next week. So there's lots of people starting to break out of their garages and their shops and get out on the water. And hopefully I'll be doing that myself here pretty soon. I did recently get an email from Barb and Carrie at the Northwest Maritime Center that it's only 156 days to the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival this September in Port Townsend, Washington. I plan on being there again. Had an absolute blast last year, more fun than you should have in 3 days, I think. Did lots of interviews, taught some classes, saw a ton of people, got some photos, got out on the water. I mean, folks, if you're going to go somewhere for a few days in the Northwest in September, you got to come to Port Townsend. It's really a blast. I would encourage you to do that. It's the weekend after Labor Day in September. Okay, I'd like to read the list of new subscribers to the podcast. I'd like to welcome you to the Hooked on Wooden Boats monthly free podcast newsletter. And we've got, 7 or 8 new subscribers. Jim Patella, got a list here. Brian Kelly, Tim Harker, Ansley French, Bruce Jarrett, George Pasquale, Kevin Harding, and that's it. I would like to thank you guys for subscribing to the newsletter. Great to have you on board. If you have not yet subscribed, I would encourage you to do so. You can go to hookedonwoodenboats.com/subscribe. Give me your name, email address, and you're in like Flint, as they say. And about once a month, I send out a newsletter with highlights, resources, fun things that's happening on Hooked on Wooden Boats, at Hooked on Wooden Boats, and with other wooden boat activities in this area and other places in the world. So it's just a fun way to connect with people and let you know what's happening. So I would encourage you to check that out. I think I mentioned this in my last podcast, but this is definitely the way I'm leaning. I've got 3 boats right now. Well, I've kind of got 2.5. 2 completed boats. One is my dory that I finished building in 97 that I've used a lot over the years. And then I've got this partially built scamp. And then I've got my 12-foot Lapstrake Canoe, Chelan. And I think I can get by with 2 boats. So I'm thinking once I get my garage cleaned out, I will refinish my dory and sell that, take the money from that and finish my Scamp and use that as my all-purpose boat for fishing, sailing, messing about, camping, maybe even sleep on it, and just kind of make it an all-purpose rig. I think that'd really be fun. So that's the direction I'm heading. It's kind of hard to think of selling the dory because it's kind of the first real boat I built. So I have some sentimental attachment, a lot of good memories with it, with our kids, pulling them in inner tubes and things like that with the little 15-horse Merc that I still have. So we'll see. But, realistically, I don't need two boats in that 12 to 14-foot size range. And the Scamp, as you know, is 11 feet 11 inches, a very versatile rig. So I know I could have a lot of fun with that. And the one I partially built, I fully assembled and sold last year as a kit and made some money. I kind of got the fever for getting a Scamp for myself. So we'll see. But I think that's the direction I am headed. Okay, we're going to move on to the interview with David Nichols of the Small Craft Skills Academy, which, by the way, the website address for that is smallcraftacademy.com. At the end of this interview, we discuss what the address is, and I think it may have been given incorrectly at one point. So, smallcraftacademy.com. They've got a lot of great classes, both in person and virtually online, for all kinds of cool stuff. So check that out. Anyway, let's move on to the interview. Take it away, David. Okay, it is March 15th, 2014. I am on the phone with David Nichols of Austin, Texas. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. David and I connected recently through our mutual friend Chuck, and I have a difficult time with Chuck's last. Is it Leibweiner?
Oh, everybody has trouble with his last name. I say Leanweber, but
Leanweber. Okay, Chuck Leanweber from.
Correct. I really don't know. We're gonna have to check with Chuck about.
We should ask Chuck that question. And then I did find out last summer, Dave, that you were connected with Howard Rice and John Welsford in the Small Craft Skills Academy, and you were going to do some interactive classes and so on. So anyway, it's great to do this podcast with you. You're down in Austin, Texas, which is a long way from where I am, but with this amazing technology we have, it's like you're sitting in the office with me here. So anyway, let's start, Dave, with tell me about your youth, where you grew up, any boating you did, and that sort of thing.
Well, actually, I'm a rare duck. I actually was born and raised in Austin. We're a native Austinites are a fairly dilute population, but I was born here. I think that there was a creek very close to my house, and that's where I spent, my child. It was kind of a Leave It to Beaver kind of childhood, really, and we make little bamboo boats and things like that in the creek, and it was really a lovely place, and so I guess that's kind of where that's boat building began, was making bamboo boats, and then because of the lakes that are right around Austin, I grew up fishing in those lakes and spent a lot of time in boats with my dad. So, boats have always had kind of a fond place in, my memories in my childhood. And then I guess probably the most significant thing I think about boat building and boats was, and I can trace this really to almost a very precise moment in history. My dad took me to see Thor Heyerdahl's Kon-Tiki. And this was like probably, I was 7, maybe 8 years old. And I sat and watched that movie and watched those guys, go up into the mountains and cut the balsa trees and float them down, and they made a raft, and I thought, wow, that's just a bigger thing, that we're doing, and that actually floats. And the stuff that we're doing, we get on it and it sinks, but still, that was pretty cool. And so I could see that, boats were really a pretty amazing thing, and they could really kind of take you a lot of places. And I've always sort of compared boats to magic carpets, and that's kind of my attitude about boats, and it really comes from that sort of watershed moment in the documentary Kon-Tiki.
Interesting. What kind of boats was your dad using to fish from at those days?
Old aluminum Lone Star boats. And there was a company it was a post-war company, and they made aluminum boats. They were 14 and 16 footers based on, probably that standard round. They were really an old wooden boat that they just sort of adapted to aluminum, and they were relatively inexpensive. And we didn't own one, actually. There was a number of boat docks on the chain of lakes, of the Highland Lakes, would have fleets of these things that they rented out to fishermen. And if you had your own outboard motor, which my dad did, that was one of the first things that he bought after the war ended. And I guess for those young guys and young listeners, I mean World War II. Right after that, my dad bought a Johnson Seahorse, 5 horsepower. And I remember going down and picking it up at the train station in Austin. And so that's the way we fished the lakes. My dad had an outboard motor, and we would go and rent these aluminum boats and fish the lakes. And I would, they had I was kind of a small kid, and I was very young at the time, actually. And they had this really kind of cool little place up in the bow. And so I would take a blanket, and because my dad insisted on getting up at, like 2 o'clock in the morning in order to get to the lake and be in the water by the time the sun came up. So I would sort of curl up in the bow and sleep until the sun was up or whenever. And so you put me in a boat, man, and the waves and the water and everything, and I'm very happy because I have very fond memories of that. So that was kind of, I grew up in I would like to say wooden boats, but that wouldn't be true. They were aluminum boats, and very noisy. I'm really not fond of aluminum boats, but
anyway. We'll continue with the interview, even though you've used aluminum boats in your lifetime.
Even though I slept down on the side, right?
As long as you don't use the fiberglass word, we're okay. No, right. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, right. No, I never say that.
Oh, cool. So, what did you do when you got out of high school, Dave?
Well, I went to UT and sort of didn't do well in UT. I flunked out a couple of times and went out west. And then I happened to show up in San Francisco in 1967. So I was in San Francisco from 1967 until 1970. And nice time to be in San Francisco. And then wound up in Nevada, and I started in film. I started in photography and film while I was in San Francisco, and wound up moving to Reno, and was hired on on the staff of the University of Nevada, Reno, as a staff photographer and a filmmaker, and I spent a few years there. And then just sort of, moved around, and I'd always, in the back of my mind, though, that whole Kon-Tiki experience as a child was sort of sitting back there cooking, and I'd really wanted to build boats and been very interested in building boats for a long time, but I was never in one place long enough, and my wife and I came back to Austin in 1977, and so I sort of had been in one place long enough to begin to make that boat building dream.
Hey, Dave, we're losing our connection here on Skype a little bit.
I'm sorry?
Could you repeat that? Our connection got a little weak on Skype there for just a minute.
Yeah, I noticed that. It sounded like I was getting a little bit of feedback.
Yeah.
Let's see. Where did the connection go bad?
Well, you were talking about you were doing various things with film and so on in the back of your mind. You were thinking about this Kon-Tiki thing, but
we came back to Austin in 1977, and I'd always wanted to do boats, but I was never really in one place long enough to really do it. It's not an instant gratification process. And so when we came back, I happened to be in one place long enough and wound up having a shop and the tools that I needed. And so I began the process. And in Austin, while there's a lot of water around in terms of lakes, and there is a fair amount of boat building going on here, small boat building in Austin. It wasn't really like the Northeast or the Northwest, where you have this very, very well-established boat building industry going on. So I was actually kind of operating in a vacuum, and so I actually became my own apprentice, which is kind of an interesting experience, and began to experiment with boats, and I started this. I just decided I was going to do it, and so I began, and my first boat was a John Gardner Swampscott dory, and I began the process, and after a couple of false starts, really, and I was just taking me forever because I was very concerned about doing something wrong. And so finally I could see I was never going to get anywhere if I didn't make some sort of change in the way I was thinking about things. And so I decided that what I was going to do was I was going to call this first boat School. And if I made a really horrible mistake, I was going to allow myself the privilege, or not the privilege, but I was going to allow myself the ability to just cut the boat up, put it in the dumpster, and start all over again. And actually, once I made that decision, things went pretty well. And as we both know, there's really not any right or wrong way to build a boat. It's just how it's the end product that counts. And actually, it was that experience. It's that experience of being my own apprentice and sort of being, teaching myself how to do this in really essentially a vacuum. That has really, I think, been very beneficial in the way that, and I teach boat building, in teaching and making films about boat building, because I kind of understand what it's like to be standing really in a vacuum and not even really knowing the jargon. And boat building is really it's almost the language of boat building is really almost a patois. I mean, you start thinking about some of the boat building terms, and it's like, wow, what was that? So that was kind of where that all began, but I've always been really, at one point in time, I was kind of unhappy about the fact that I'd had to do all of this kind of in a vacuum, but now I think it was to my benefit, because it makes it very easy for me to understand where the beginning boat builder starts from. Where the guy that just wants to build a boat in his shop, he doesn't, that's all he wants to do. He doesn't want to be a career boat builder. He doesn't want to do anything. He just has this dream to build his own boat in his shop, and maybe not even much of a shop. So it gives me kind of an interesting perspective about where, and a very good understanding, I think, about where that boat builder is starting from.
So that Swampscott dory, did you build traditional, or did you do glued plywood lapstrake?
Oh, no, I did it glued lapstrake.
Okay. Yeah.
I'd still be working on it.
Yeah, right.
If it had been traditional. Yeah, no, the epoxy, that's really kind of the interesting thing, too, is that, and all of this, I started this, that first boat was about 20-something years ago. And epoxy was really kind of beginning to take off. It had probably been around for a while, but I wasn't really aware of it. And then it was still pretty new 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And so that it seems like that anyway, it was new to me anyway. And once I became, sort of familiar with the glued lapstrake, man, I glommed onto that like, gangbusters. I was really thrilled about the epoxy because it made it possible for me to build a boat, and so that's where I've always been. I've always operated within that epoxy window. Yeah. Whatever I do has to do with epoxy.
So that first boat, then, you built that from John Gardner's The Dory book?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
That's right. Yes.
I built a dory from that book, the 14-foot semi-dory in the 90s.
Oh, no, it wasn't the semi-dory. It was the Swampscott sailing dory, or the little rowing dory.
Right.
I have built that little semi-dory. I did that for a customer. I love that semi-dory. That's just a wonderful, magnificent, beautiful boat, for one thing, and a really good performing boat. No, the first boat that I did was the little rowing. I guess it was a 16-foot Swampscott, if memory serves. I could get out my John Gardner dory book and look, but I don't think John Gardner had that as a sailing dory, and I wanted a sailboat, and so I put in the centerboard and everything, and centerboard case, and sort of once I began to veer off of the set of plans, I never looked back. And that was kind of what happened to me. I kept thinking, boy, I'd really like this boat, but I really want to make this change here. And so finally I decided that I kept working with other people's designs enough that I thought, gee, you know what, and changing them and everything. So I thought, gee, why don't I just do my own boat? Well, interestingly enough, the ply boats, that wonderful little boat design program, appeared about the time that I made that decision. And so I picked up ply boats, taught myself how to use it. I'm really not a very techno savvy person. It's always a struggle for me, but I managed to do it, and so I designed a couple of boats, and at that point in time I was into fly fishing, still am actually, and so really everything that I was doing really kind of revolved around boats for fly fishing, and glued Lapstrake, of course. And I just fell in love with that process. I love the way Lapstrake looks, and then then it just becomes this really wonderful, sort of fantastic boat when you put epoxy into the mix, and it becomes doable for the average guy.
Right. So, Dave, you've written some books. Tell us about those.
Well, actually, the first book, Working Guide to Small Boats, Traditional Small Boat Sales, really comes from being, again, in a vacuum. And I really wanted to build the Swampscott dory. I wanted to make a sailboat, and so then I began to look into sails, and the John Gardner always had traditional sails and stuff in the book. So I thought I began to look into ordering a sail, and none of the sail makers, the one or two sail makers that were in Austin, knew anything at all about traditional sails. They were all, the lakes around here are full of plastic boats that have the Bermudan sail, and they're all racers. And so I began to, at that point, I was reading WoodenBoat magazine religiously, still do, and noticed that Robin Lincoln was teaching a class on sail making, and so I decided that's where I was going. I was going to learn how to make sails as well. So I went up, spent some time with Robin, and came back, and I was really interested. I was sort of fascinated by the fact that when you talk to, you go around and talk to sail makers, and you start talking about sliding gunters and standing lugs and stuff, and balanced lugs. They really didn't know really much about those sails, and so I wound up writing an article for a magazine called Boatbuilder. It's not around anymore, and called How to Talk to Your Sailmaker. And it was sort of how to take the knowledge about what you knew about traditional sails and talk to your sailmaker so that you could get a traditional sail from a guy that really didn't know much about traditional sails. And traditional sails kind of have their own way of being cut and their own special needs. So I wrote that article, and the guys at Keith Lawrence, who was the editor of Boatbuilder magazine at that time, liked it very much. And so I sort of began to write a series. I wrote about 5 articles for Boatbuilder, and I thought, gee, this has sort of and all about sail making. And I thought, gee, this has kind of the makings of a book. And so I called Keith, and I said to Keith, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And he said, "Wow, I think that's really a great idea, but the people that I work with, you're probably better off not. It's not their thing, and so you're try International Marine or whatever." And so it just sort of sat for quite a while, and Chuck Leanweber, our mutual friend, came down to my shop at one point, and I just happened to mention to Chuck that I had, and he knew that I had written some articles, and so I've known Chuck for a good many years, and so I mentioned to Chuck about this, and I said, "Gee, I just don't know where to go with this. I've got half a book written, but I know I'd make a really great book." And Chuck said, "Boy, I know just the guy you need to talk to." So Chuck set up, I guess, an introduction with Garth Batista at Breakaway Books, who is my publisher. And Garth said, "Hey, send me the 5 chapters." I sent him the 5 chapters, and he said, "Wow, this is good. I like this. Let's do a book." And so that was my first book, and it was a lot of fun to write. I enjoyed doing it, and it has it was very well received. It's about to go into its 3rd printing, and so I thought, wow, this is great. I really like doing this, and I approached Garth again for a book on glued lapstrake construction, and Garth said, "Yeah, this is great. Let's do it." So did that one, and then did the 3rd book was about the Sea Eagles, and it's a sailboat. The others, the Lapstrake is really about canoes, and I've always been, I've always liked sailboats. I've always been a big fan of sailboats. I suppose I'm not as good a sailor as I would like to be, but I can get from point A to point B, and it's hard when you're associated with guys like John Welsford and Howard Rice to sort of be the level of sailor that I am. But anyway, it was the 3rd book is Building the Sea Eagles, which is a book about 2 boats, a 14 and a 16-foot boat that really kind of launch like a power boat. You can launch them off of a trailer, and they draw really very little water centerboards up. They're a combination of fixed keel and centerboard, and so that it was all of the boats. And this was another sort of, I think, conclusion that I came to years and years ago, was one of the biggest problems that wannabe boat builders have is space. Most of us, most of us live in subdivisions that have covenants against building a boat in your backyard, and they get really pretty testy if you do things that are, against the covenants in the neighborhood. So it became clear that whatever boat these guys were going to build had to be done in a double car garage. So that's been one of the parameters of the boats that I design. That you can build them in a 2-car garage. Oh, cool. And because that's one of the time and a place to build it are the 2 biggest issues that keep people from building boats. And so I thought, well, I can't do anything about the time, but I can certainly design boats that can be built in a 2-car garage.
Yeah, definitely. So what advice would you give to a person that's anticipating building their very first wooden boat?
do it. I mean, just do it. You can't. See, this is when I was teaching, and I taught at WoodenBoat School for I think about 4 or 5 years, and I also taught at Great Lakes Boat Building School in Cedarville, Michigan, for a couple of years. I always tell my students, just do it. You can't. There's no mistake that you can make that can't be undone. You can cut your boat in half by mistake. That's a hard mistake to make, but you can still, with enough work, undo that mistake. So, and then I always give them this sort of classic example of something that happened to me. And I was working in my shop, and it was cold, and I was in a hurry, and so I was trying to make some epoxy kick off quickly, and I put a quartz iodine light, which we know generates a lot of heat, really close to the scarf, and instead of and it wasn't the scarf itself, it was the epoxy that I had put in the lap to fill that, and I was trying to get that to go off quickly, and I put that light up there, and it softened the scarf enough in the plank that it let go, and I was devastated. I was just I was so angry with myself, and I thought, all right, I'm just going to put this boat in the dumpster, and it's just terrible, and this is a disaster. And I decided to go get a cup of coffee and come back, and I'd figure out how to cut the boat up into small enough pieces to get it in the dumpster. And by the time that I got back, I'd figured out a solution to the problem of the scarf being let go. And so I was able to fix it and press on with the boat, and the boat was actually finished. So that was a really important lesson for me as a boat builder. And that was where that no mistake you can make that can't be undone came from. And so I think Pete Culler said, experience starts the moment you begin. And I love that expression. I think it's a wonderful expression. And I think it sums up a lot about how novice boat builders should start. None of us were born knowing how to do this. We all learned, and we all started from ground zero, which is where the novice boat builder is starting from. So, it's just you just like Nike, just do it. Just start, and don't worry about making mistakes, because there is no right or wrong way to do it. I think one of my favorite things is that when I was teaching at WoodenBoat School, Greg Rossell was teaching a class next to my class, and I was talking to my students, and I said, well, look, there's no right or wrong way to build a boat, and if you have 10 boat builders building the same boat side by side, you'll have 10 guys going about it in 10 different ways. And about that time, Greg walked through, and he said, no, that's not right. That's not right. And I went, oh, okay. And he said, no, you have 20 ways. You'll have 10 guys that have 20 ways of building that boat, because we all know at least 2 ways to do the same thing. So I think that's it. You have to that was one of the big limiting factors for me. Was I was afraid when I first started building boats and building in a vacuum. I was like, I was afraid to build it, to do it the wrong way. And so I would agonize over every move that I made instead of just finding something that worked and doing it. So I think that's one of the pieces of advice that I give my students is there's no right or wrong way to do this. Just do it. Some are easier than others, and some are more labor efficient than others. But the end result is what counts. And then the other is, don't be afraid of making mistakes, because you can fix mistakes that you make.
Very good. I like that advice, because otherwise you get paralyzed and you don't do anything.
That's exactly right, man. That's exactly right. You become, and that was what was happening to me when I first started. I was just paralyzed. I couldn't move, and I thought, wow, at this rate, I'm going to be 130 when I finish this boat.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really important, and I think it's really, really important for the boat builder that's just starting out, and all he has is just a dream that he wants to build a boat, and so probably the thing that's keeping that guy from doing that is, I don't want to do it the wrong way. Well, there isn't a wrong way. Just, press on.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap it up here with one more question and kind of topic here. I'd like to hear a little bit about your interactive classes for Small Crafts Skills Academy, and then tell us, give us a plug for people that are interested in finding out more about the Skills Academy and what you guys do. Give me your advertisement here, Dave.
Oh, okay. Wow. All right. The interactive classes. Well, it's at some point along the way, about the time that web conferencing and all of that was starting to get really big, I thought, wow, what if you were to take this whole idea and instead of just using a single, webcam or a single camera, you did multiple cameras, and you could really show someone how to build these boats, or build a boat, or any complex skill for that matter, very easily. And wow, they're interactive, so that real-time questions back and forth. And so I began to check into it, and sort of came up with a way to go about making. You can do interactive, or you can do multi-camera streaming, but interactive multi-camera streaming was, none of the programs were able to do that. And so I came up with a way to do multi-camera interactive streaming, and got involved with, met Howard Rice at Sale, Oklahoma, and Howard and I began to talk and communicate, and we both felt like that the interactive boat building and interactive skills was a really great idea. And so we put together a series of interactive classes, and we taught a few last summer, and they were successful. We have. I'm teaching one in Great Britain in May for fine boat kits. It's actually one that is only happening in the UK, but I'm doing that from my workshop in Austin, which is sort of tells you the power of the web and the power of this process. Is that, here I am in Austin, Texas, teaching a bunch of guys in Great Britain how to build boats, and interactive real time. So that's kind of where we are with that. It's interesting, Dan, that everyone goes, wow, that's really cool, but I think it's very difficult for people to kind of wrap their heads around it. It's like, wow, that's really great. And then it's I think it's a lot of people are kind of intimidated by technology in general, and then you sort of combine the boat building intimidation and the technology intimidation, and so people have kind of trouble wrapping. But it's so simple; it's very straightforward, and it's the technology part is not difficult, and the boat building part is not difficult. So, and again, it seems like one of these things that's sort of a marriage made in heaven. I'm not sure what the schedule looks like for the summer in terms of the interactive classes for Small Craft Skills Academy. I am doing the one for fine boat kits, and we'll see how the one goes in Great Britain. And the more, I think it's just going to be something that takes a bit of time to build momentum. I think it's just such a new idea that people are having a little bit of trouble adjusting to it, I suppose. So we'll see how it goes. I still believe in it. I think it's a wonderful thing, and I think it's a really great way to have a lot of guys that don't have the time to make it to face-to-face boat building school. You can actually do this in your own shop. So
yeah, very cool. And so if somebody wants more information about Small Craft Skills Academy, how would they get that, Dave?
They go to Small Craft. Oh my! Now I'm embarrassed. Smallcraftskillsacademy.com, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Boy, I'm so sorry. Now I'm really, really embarrassed. It's smallcraftacademy.com. It's smallcraftacademy.com. How embarrassing! Oh my. So yes, they can go there, or they can go to it's findboatkits.com, and there'll be some information there, or they can contact me and through David Boats at austin.rr.com, and I'll be glad to talk to them about it.
Okay, very cool. Well, I appreciate you being on the podcast today, Dave. Any parting comments you'd like to make?
I build boats.
Okay.
Let's all get magic carpets. That's what I think.
Very cool. Okay, well, thanks a lot, Dave. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Dan. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. David, thanks for doing the interview. I really appreciate it. And I wish you the best with the Small Craft Skills Academy and everything that's happening there. And I hope to get to meet you in person this year, probably at the Port Townsend Wooden Boat Festival, because I believe you mentioned that you're going to be there. So that'd be pretty cool. Anyway, best to you. Thanks a lot. I would like to mention that if you'd like to contribute a little bit to the podcast to help pay for it, I do have a tip jar, so to speak, on my homepage. You can click on that little graphic on the right-hand side there and donate a couple bucks if you want to help pay for the cost, and I appreciate that. And I've had quite a few contributions so far. I think I've mentioned it costs about $100 a month to run this thing, and I think in the first couple months I've maybe brought in $150, something like that. So that's pretty cool. I appreciate it a lot. Thanks in advance if you do that. I appreciate it. Okay, well, we're off to the races now until the next podcast in 2 weeks. Thanks for your patience as I am in this bi-weekly format with life being real busy. It's just been too much to do every week, so I'm going to every other week. which really takes the load off. Plus, doing the interviews by phone is really a blessing. So I'm very thankful for being able to do that when I can't travel. Anyway, I hope you have a great week. If you're not in the wooden boat game, it's time to get in. Buy a Wooden Boat magazine, or go buy some wood and build a boat, or talk to somebody that has a wooden boat, or rent one, or take a picture of one. Go to your local wooden boat shop if you've got one. Give me a phone call if you want to talk about wooden boats, 425-319-7800. There it is, my cell phone on the internet, so to speak. Anyway, have a great day. Wooden Boat Dan over and out. Keep the bright side up and the barnacled side down. God bless until we meet again in 2 weeks. Take care.